Yeah, this is not somebody in a hoodie in the back of a garage. This is a sophisticated business.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mac Show. On this week's episode, with an election on the way, Jeff and I chat about what Canadians need to know about the messy world of political advertising online. We'll also tell you the latest on AI comments that might be coming to Instagram, France's proposed anti-encryption legislation, and lots more. Jeff, I know you just had your third Wednesday event in Halifax, so what are the people in the tech community there talking about this past week?
Well, actually, the other Max segment comes out of a conversation we had at Third Wednesday about whether Google search is getting worse and what role AI is playing in that. So always have lots of great conversations there. In fact, if any of our listeners are ever in Halifax on the third Wednesday of any month, then please come down and join us at the Atlantica Hotel after work. You can find us at Third Wednesday on Twitter, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. Everyone's welcome. It's a great chance to talk tech with some really interesting people. And yeah, like I said, this week it managed to give me my the other rack segment.
Well, I hope to get down to one of those. And I don't know if you noticed, but I was encouraging people on X to buy you a drink for putting up with me all these years. So I don't know if that happened.
I approve completely.
Excellent. All right, now let's get into the headlines.
News feed.
Jeff, Canada is going to the polls, so let's talk about online advertising when it comes to political advertisements. So Meta just announced that they are asking advertisers to disclose if they are using any type of artificial intelligence in political ads. According to the Globe and Mail, Meta asked advertisers to disclose the use of AI and other digital technologies. What do you think about this?
Well, so first of all, I believe it's really aimed at AI being used for images, video, audio. Basically, it's an attempt to limit deepfakes in politics, which is a worthwhile thing to fight against because, my gosh, what a terrible thing when you can no longer rely on what people are saying in a video clip as being something they actually said. And we've seen that manipulated in the past. And so that's great. Meta scrapped all their U.S. fact-checking programs after the U.S. election. So it makes me wonder how long these things last and how much they really care about it. But in principle, I think it's obviously a really important thing.
I think it's a really important thing. And I think it's important to also mention the word that they use, which is to disclose. So presumably you can still use AI to create those political advertisements, but you have to disclose that you are doing so. I think the language around this gets a little bit loose, Jeff, in terms of how you're using AI. Are you using AI, like you said, it's meant for photos and videos, but are you using AI to maybe enhance a photo or a video? Are you using it to manipulate? Do you actually think that political advertisers are going to adhere to this?
It's like most, and honestly, I think it's one of our issues in modern society. If you don't enforce rules, then the worst people won't follow those rules. So yeah, I noticed that language too, and I thought it was fairly wishy-washy. So, we can hope and we can see, I've already seen some ads out that are, if not using AI, just pretty tasteless in terms of their depiction of other leaders and stuff. I'm sure you've seen some of that too. But yeah, I think the proof will be in the pudding. Let's see if anyone's actually caught and forbidden from doing this sort of thing, and that'll tell us a lot more than anything that Meta puts out in a press release, because you can't really take them at their word, as we've seen with their conversation last week and beyond.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate, but as soon as I read this and I was thinking about Meta, I thought to myself, like, okay, let's take a comparison of maybe criminal activity. It'd almost be like telling the police, like, before you're using a gun, please let us know that you plan to use a gun to commit this crime. We're not going to enforce it, but please do let us know that you plan to do this, because that's how little trust I have in Meta actually doing anything at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you've pointed out they've got an ad library where you can actually look up some of these things, which I took a peek at, but I think you know a little bit more than I do about this. If you want to just share with our listeners for a second what you can find in there.
I think this is really important for all Canadians in this election cycle to understand that Meta does have this ad library that you're able to sift through and see all of the money spent on political ads. I know, Jeff, we've been talking in Canada for the past few weeks about media traveling on different campaign planes and whether they should be allowed. Most of them are allowing this, but I think even more important for the average Canadian is understanding when they're on Instagram and Facebook who is behind the advertisements that they are seeing and how much money is being spent. So, like you said, you're able to dive into this ad library. It's super, super easy to use. All you do is you filter for Canada. You go to any type of advertisers who are advertising issues, elections, or politics. You can spit out a report and see the past day or the past 7 days. I had a chance to do this. And at any given time, and we're going to see this even more so in the coming weeks, there are thousands and thousands of advertisements that are created across these social media platforms within the Meta universe. And Jeff, here's the thing, just to stitch this back to our conversation about AI and advertisements. Yes, Meta has said that you aren't supposed to use AI or you have to disclose it. But some of these advertisements that I found, including one from a third-party publisher called Canada Proud, they are actually photoshopping all their ads, making our candidates look like they have, long noses, like they're in a Pinocchio cartoon. So apparently that's still allowed.
It's you could get to the same ends without using AI. Back in the day, we didn't have to use AI to fake those things. It's just obviously makes it easier. So yeah, I was blown away by one, the amount of money you see being spent, and it's from the Conservative Party, I think was the top of the list when I looked at the Canadian ones, but the public sector Alliance of Canada, the big union for Canadian public sector unions, is right up there. But then there's these little fly-by-night things, and those are the ones where you wonder if that's just playing whack-a-mole. Can somebody go on there, run political ads, use AI, be told you're not allowed to do that? Those ads get taken down after the fact, and then they just pop up another company to do that. Now, I know there are some limitations in which accounts can do political advertising and stuff. Maybe that's taken care of, but yeah, when you see some of the names behind the money being put into these things, it's definitely makes you wonder about the whole whack-a-mole thing. You can pretty easily come up with another organization to do that, and so yeah, we'll see if this keeps holding on. But hopping across the pond for a minute in terms of some more sort of digital safety privacy things, France has rejected a proposal to gut end-to-end encryption, which was proposed as being something that was necessary to fight drug trafficking.
Well, I saw this, and I know that the EFF, the amazing foundation that really is kind of the go-to organization when it comes to adhering to certain rules of engagement online. They're a great organization to follow.
Yeah.
They said that this was a huge win. Now we know that if you are using an encrypted app, a messaging app, for example, in France, there isn't going to be a backdoor for the government to access those encrypted messages. So I think this is a move in the right direction, although there are some places in the world, again, that don't want to adhere to these type of guidelines when it comes to encryption.
Yeah, so the end results, if this had gone through instead of being rejected, uh, apps like Signal and WhatsApp, the government would have to be able to be provided access to private conversations, which is just not appropriate. And the Electronic Frontier Foundation there, EFF, they argue strongly, as they always do, that encryption makes us more safe, not less safe. So having governments, engage in this sort of stuff, which we have seen other governments testing the waters around this. So we've had the UK, Australia, the US all flirt with anti-encryption laws, and it's something that is not really a very comforting indicator of how our governments think they should solve problems. So let's hope that the common sense being shown here by France serves as an example for others.
Okay, so if you are looking for comforting indicators, I have one for you that'll make you feel better. And this is sticking in Europe. It seems that Italy's talks with Starlink for a 5-year deal that was worth $1.6 billion. That's kind of stalled because of concerns over national security. I think this is a smart move and a good move in the right direction.
Yeah, and we talked about something similar with Ontario abandoning their Starlink deal. This all comes down to distrust of Elon Musk and, frankly, the Trump administration, people being worried about handing over important defense infrastructure to parties that have demonstrated that they can't really be trusted. So, in good news, it looks like Google's going to be spinning off its own Starlink competitor, which is desperately needed. So hopefully there'll be some more options on the table for people who don't want to do business with Musk and the companies that they don't feel that can provide them with the sort of trust relationship that they need to for these very high security deals like Starlink.
Well, I try sometimes when we're going through our headlines, I think, okay, I don't want to talk about Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg a lot, but we cannot avoid both of these characters because they are intricately involved in everything that we do. And going back to a story that was just released out of Meta again, and this specifically is about Instagram, it turns out that they are spot testing AI generated comments on Instagram so that you could potentially use this little feature called Write with Meta AI, a prompt that would help you comment on other people's posts. This is an example, Jeff, of technology that no one asked for and that nobody needs, I think.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't agree more. And it's mind-boggling that people can be, and maybe they're not, maybe it doesn't get used, but I have a feeling it does get used. So people who will just give in and be so lazy that they want AI to come up with an off-the-cuff comment for them. I can't really imagine anything as inauthentic as that. And like a lot of other things with AI, something that will degrade human interaction even further if people indulge in this stuff too much. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So yeah, I find it amazing that anyone would want AI to be the one to come up with their 3-word comment on an image they see on Instagram. It's pretty weak.
And also, if you're even considering using something like this, if it does come out widespread on a widespread basis for a large number of users, I just want to remind people that Meta is a company that uses AI for so much, including popping up those moments that you've had on Facebook, for example, or Instagram, when people have passed away or when you've
Yeah.
broken up with your partner. I mean, their AI in the context of the platform really, really sucks. So I would not depend on it for anything. Now, Jeff, sticking with this theme of AI, we're going to talk next about AI search engines and why you need to be careful. That's this week's topic in The Other Mac.
The Other Mac.
The other day, I was using the Google search engine in my browser, and after becoming increasingly annoyed at the Google generative AI overview dominating the top of my results page, I searched for how to disable it, which just doesn't seem to be something that Google really wants you to do. Why do I want to turn these off? Well, to start with, as with all the superfluous AI that exists only to train itself, the environmental costs of Google adding in generative AI results when I get better results from their conventional search is frustrating. And with roughly 1 in 4 Americans using AI alternatives to conventional search engines, we're talking about significant energy waste. And why do I think AI is giving me worse results? Well, because of studies like the recent one from Columbia Journalism's Center for Digital Journalism. In the study, researchers provided direct examples from news articles and asked 8 different AI-driven search tools to identify the article's original headline, publication date, publisher, and URL. The best results from these tools came from Perplexity AI, which provided incorrect results 37% of the time. That's the best result, almost 2 out of 5 wrong. And how do the big boys do? Well, ChatGPT search was wrong 67% of the time. It gave the right answer 1 out of 3 times. And Elon Musk's Grok 3 abomination had an error rate of 84%. This is obviously verging on useless when it comes to getting answers you can depend on, and it causes real problems for content creators as AI can cut users off completely from ever coming into contact with where their content was originally published. And we've all heard about how AI models don't really like to admit that they don't have a good answer, and so provide confabulations of incorrect answers instead. Why would they do this? Well, maybe it's to try to make it not as obvious how useless these models are for some things. At least Microsoft Copilot just straight up declined to answer the majority of questions in the study, which I suppose is more honest. Also annoyingly, in Google's search engine AI case at least, it's not easy to turn off. You can turn it off for an individual search after you've completed the search, which is not helpful relative to my environmental concerns at all. There's apparently a plugin for Chrome that allows you to turn it off if you're using Chrome, which I don't use. It's also disabled when you're using private browsing or incognito mode, which is also not ideal, but at least clearly illustrates the insanity of humans now having to hide themselves from AI in order to avoid it. And of course, you could just stop using Google, which I'm going to give a try to, given that the results aren't really what they used to be anyway. So let us know on our social channels about your trials and tribulations with AI search. And keep your head up out there. I'm the Other Mac. Enjoy.
Thanks so much, Jeff. And when we come back, we're going to share everything you need to know, especially if you're a small business owner, about what happens when a cyber thief kidnaps your digital things.
Ransomware is like a digital hostage situation where attackers hold on to your personal or professional information until they get paid. To learn more about this issue, Amber sits down with one of the leading cybersecurity voices.
Safety matters.
I'm here with Tony Anscombe, who is the Chief Security Evangelist at ESET. Thank you for sitting down with me.
Hey, always a pleasure, Amber.
We are going to speak about ransomware, which is a phrase that I'm familiar with. But for people who don't know what ransomware is, what is the easiest definition?
Well, ransomware is historically where somebody would encrypt or lock your system. But today, I think I'd actually term it. Unfortunately, we all know it as ransomware. I'd say it's extortion. It's cyber extortion. And that's probably a better way to think of it because now it's not about a piece of software that's encrypting your data. It's about extortion of money for some reason, for something somebody is doing to you or has done to you.
How common is ransomware? What is the state of ransomware right now in 2025?
Unfortunately, it's more common than you think, and it affects all sizes of businesses, all the way from very small businesses all the way up to big businesses. And we only read about those big ones in the media. So it's a real big issue out there. If somebody thinks they can get access to your network, exfiltrate sensitive data, then potentially you could be held for that extortion demand.
Let's dive into some of the numbers in terms of ransomware and the threats that exist. Is this something that is increasing or decreasing?
Well, so there are different numbers from different sources. So one of the ones that always interests me is Chainalysis. So they're the guys that look at blockchain, things that go across the blockchain, so cryptocurrency movement, and things they can attribute to going to a ransomware group. We've seen over the last 4 years it go from just over $1 billion. It then declined, and some of that was disruption in that marketplace due to the conflict in Ukraine, etc. And then we saw it go back up in 2023 to over that $1 billion mark again. Now in 2024, that's declined to $814 million, according to Chainalysis. And other people will say that we're seeing less attacks. I personally think the number of attacks is probably plateaued. It's probably a straight line because what you see is they will run campaigns. These groups suddenly in February you'll see more attacks than you did in January, and that's because they're running a campaign, or something has happened in that arena. And last year we saw disruption. There was law enforcement activity at the start of the year against one particular group that got taken out of play for a little while. But of course they reform, they're not going to stop doing that business, and then they come back online. So you see that disruption. So I don't see the 814 million as a decline. I think that's just a regrouping, and I suspect it will come back. Cyber insurance is an interesting topic around there as well. Is cyber insurers will negotiate with ransomware criminals on payment on behalf of their clients. Maybe some of those demands are becoming smaller, so maybe the cyber criminals are learning what the insurer is willing to pay. So asks more for the demand might be more reasonable because they're understanding what the willingness to pay is.
So it's quite sophisticated in terms of the organization of these attacks.
Yeah, this is not somebody in a hoodie in the back of a garage. This is a sophisticated business. And what we don't hear about is ransomware groups are, we hear about the ransomware group at the end, the people that exfiltrate the data and do the negotiation. What we don't hear about is, for example, the access broker. Who was it that got access to your system? Well, that was somebody else, and they probably sold those credentials on to somebody else. That affiliate then probably did the exfiltration of data, Somebody else is then doing the ransomware demand. It's an entire business model behind this. It's a sophisticated business.
Now, we hear about ransomware in the media, but of course, there's not often a lot of details in terms of what took place. There is also a type of company that I was not familiar with before I started researching this interview with you, which is cyber insurance. So, cyber insurance is different than just regular old insurance, but what is its impact on cybersecurity?
Well, so what happened was a lot of company, if, as a company, a data breach or an incident, a cyber incident in your company is costly. So as a small business, it might cost you more than you can actually sustain. So it will put you out of business. And even for big companies, if you look at data, I mean, some of these cost of a data breach is anywhere between $4 and $10 million, depending on geographically where you are. So if you look at those costs, companies are now insuring to make sure they've got the right resources and also they've got the right financial backing to mitigate against losing that amount of money. But of course, it's a bit more than that, because the insurers then turn and want to know that actually, have you got this in place? How are you securing your systems? So the insurers are actually increasing cybersecurity posture for many of those companies as well by demanding certain security policies, practices, and technologies are put into place as well. So it's kind of twofold.
Generally speaking, do you think that businesses are more prepared for some of these threats?
I think they're becoming more prepared. I think cyber insurance has actually increased the visibility at the board, I would say at a boardroom level, because if the company wants to take the risk or have some of that risk underwritten by an insurer, the insurer is putting down those requirements. So I think companies are becoming more attuned to being secure because there's a demand. It's rather than just like the cybersecurity guy down the hallway saying, "Hey, I need more budget. I need to do this." Suddenly you've got this group of people outside saying, "Actually, you need to do this to reduce your risk."
As businesses get more prepared, we've sort of seen this happen in the past. The cyber criminals also get more sophisticated. So, what are some of these cyber criminals doing right now that is sort of demonstrating that, hey, we still have to stay on our toes?
Well, they certainly do, and the attack continually evolves. Now you'll see cyber criminals not use malware at all. So they'll exploit some vulnerability or exploit a credential, get into a network. They'll exfiltrate the data, hold on to the data, and then contact the company in turn and say, "Hey, you need to pay me so I don't publish this data onto the dark web." So their attack systems are evolving. They have historically attacked systems through social engineering. Now they may well use more vulnerabilities and exploit vulnerabilities, which are being traded on the internet as well. So this is a continually evolving ecosystem, both from companies' standpoint, cybersecurity standpoint, and unfortunately cybercrime.
So I think people are familiar with the phrase phishing or the term phishing, but social engineering is something that is a little bit newer in some senses. When we see social engineering, what does that look like to the average person or employee?
Hey, Amber, I'm from your IT department. Yeah. We notice you haven't patched your machine. I need to patch it for you. And there's the social engineering of, somebody's contacting you within the company. They're socially engineering your part, getting you to log on to something, giving remote access or whatever it might be, getting the credential out of you. But social engineering is broader than that too. There's business email compromise scams where you'll hear of, "Oh, there's an urgent payment we need to make." Yeah, and a cyber criminal is pretending to be somebody in the company that needs the urgent payment to be made. And the finance team, I think I am actually talking to Amber and she's asking for the payment to be made. We'll make it. So the social engineering takes many different forms. It's basically abuse of human behavior, if that makes, or human trust. Because inherently we trust each other, don't we? If somebody phoned me and they sounded like you, would I trust that it's you? I'd probably say no. I'd probably phone you back. So maybe I'm not the best example, but most people would trust, where somebody could be using deepfake audio or some sort of deepfake technology to actually imitate you.
I was going to ask not just about deepfakes, but AI in general. How does AI change ransomware in terms of some of these threats that do exist? And also, maybe both the threats, but also the defense to those threats?
Um, that's a much longer, I think, a much longer topic. But in general, cyber attackers are using AI to assist them. So we're not being attacked by AI. Being attacked uh, with tools that have been. There's an assistance in there. So, for example, if I was to send you an email trying to get you to log on, click a link, etc., that email is now really challenging. You must notice that phishing emails that land in your inbox are beautifully crafted now. They're grammatically correct. The language is great. And that's because AI tools are putting that language together and creating the content for the cyber criminal. Yeah. So it's harder to spot them. At the same time, cybersecurity companies are using AI to interrogate massive amounts of data and look for the anomalies and the weird, something out of place happening in a system to spot the incursion or the exploitation of something by a cyber criminal, because it's not necessarily about a piece of malicious software landing on a device anymore.
At this moment in time, how can businesses protect themselves from any of these ransomware threats?
So businesses need to evolve their cybersecurity. Firstly, it's a wide program. There's lots of things you should be doing, but you need to modernize cybersecurity systems. You need to be using something called EDR, endpoint detection and response systems. And if you don't have the ability to run it, you should be using a managed service to do that. And what that does is actually look at everything that goes on, the processes, the traffic, and it looks at every part of what happens on an endpoint to make sure there's nothing unusual happening, which is where the cyber criminals will work their way in. And then once they're in, of course, then they move laterally from one system to another and to find the assets of the company. So modernize, but also training. Yeah, make sure that you have strong awareness in your employees, because so many cyber attacks, unfortunately, start with an employee, I'd say, making a mistake. I would say less, it's more an error of judgment. They're duped by somebody and it could feel real at the moment they unfortunately are duped. So make sure that you do really good cybersecurity awareness training and do it frequently. Insurers will state a company should do it once a year. Personally, I think you should refresh that about every 3-4 months. Just keep it front of mind for every employee.
Great advice. And for people who want to get more information about some of these threats that do exist, where can they go to follow along with what ESET is researching and talking about?
Well, for our research and some white papers and things like that, go to welivesecurity.com. If you want to learn more about some of the technologies of protection against ransomware, look at eset.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you to ESET for supporting the Amber Mac Show with this new series on cybersecurity. Double Tap is a technology podcast and radio show focused on accessibility, assistive technology, and the latest innovations in the tech world for people who are blind or partially sighted. Amber sat down with the show's creator and host. Here's their conversation.
Talking Tech.
Today, I am excited to chat with Stephen Scott, who is in Glasgow, Scotland right now. He is the co-host and creator of the AMI podcast, Double Tap. Stephen, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, Amber, great to be here.
Okay, so I have known a little bit about you and what you do for the past couple of years, but let's go back in time even further than that. How did you start creating content to shed light on what's happening in terms of accessible tech?
Well, I needed to make money, so I thought, let's do something. And I couldn't do anything else. So I thought, I can talk for a living. How does that go? And that's kind of where it began. I started out in commercial radio. That was my beginnings in life. I started off doing talk radio. The funny thing was, it wasn't a talk show when I took it over, but by the end it was, because I just couldn't. I was talking more than playing the music, much to my boss's upset. But yeah, I started in that. And then later in my career, I joined a UK blindness charity that were starting up their own radio station. And then that got me into broadcast and charity, essentially. And then along the way, I just realized I was the tech guy at the radio station. Everyone was coming to me for the tech advice, and I was setting up the station technically and all that stuff. And I thought, it'd be really cool to do a show around tech. And no one wanted to do it. Everyone thought it was a terrible idea. Who is going to listen to a show about technology? And I just kept beating the drum saying, I think we can do this. And eventually I was told, okay, here's an hour on air. Don't break anything. Just go away and do it. Leave us alone. And that was how I did my original show. And then, what were we at? 7 or 8 years ago now, we started the double tap thing because the AMI guys, Accessible Media in Canada, they came over to the UK and spent some time with me. They were setting up their own live programming. And they heard about the tech show and said, hey, we want one of those. And I said, great. How much? And we went from there. But honestly, it's been great. It's been such an amazing ride. And Double Tap is going from strength to strength, starting off as a weekly show and now a daily show, which is insane, quite frankly.
Absolutely. But it is 2025. And so we live in the year of insanity. And there is
Yes.
a lot happening in the tech world right now. I wanted to actually start with some of the reporting that you've done recently from CSUN Assistive Technology Conference. It was the 40th annual event. This conference is new to me. I had not heard of it previously. So let's start there. What is this conference all about?
So this is like the CES for assistive technology. And that's exactly what it is, frankly, because this is an amazing event that happens every single year. As you say, it's 40th year. And it brings together all the assistive tech companies from around the world to showcase and share new innovations. And there was a bit of a slow-growing space. I often felt that, if you could see a product 1 year, you'd see it in 5 years. It was the same product, very little development. The cost of assistive technology is really high, so it has a longer shelf life. But we're actually starting to see huge innovations because of the ability to build a piece of tech and then have it regularly updated, like we can with our iPhones and our iPads and everything else. So the same kind of thing applies now to assistive tech. So we're seeing more and more updates. AI is, of course, having a huge impact across the industry, but especially in the accessibility world. And that goes to mobility, with devices from companies like Glidance that are doing some amazing work, building essentially a robot that you can take for a walk. And you're pushing it, you're in control, but it can actually take you and navigate you around obstacles in the same way that a guide dog can. For many, many people out there who cannot get a guide dog, this is the kind of thing that we've been crying out for. Me, I work from home. I don't qualify for a guide dog, but I would definitely qualify for one of these. As I always say, I want a guide dog with a plug on it that I can take with me on an airport or to an airline, so I can sit on a plane for 11 hours and travel to Anaheim in California without having to worry about the dog. So there's that kind of technology. AI is kind of seeping into every area of accessibility, of course, for transcribing meetings, for coming up with suggestions for summaries of meetings, asking questions for people who are autistic. It's an amazing tool. People who are nervous to ask questions, you can use AI to help them in meetings, make them feel less embarrassed. This is the kind of stuff that was on show. And of course, tons more at CSUN.
Now, when you speak about AI, one of the areas I was fascinated to learn more about from watching your YouTube channel was just understanding AI within the phone, how it can help people who are blind or partially sighted. It's pretty amazing in terms of the camera in our phone as well as AI tech. So what's happening in that space?
So a couple of areas that are of key interest. So of course, the camera is a big part of it. For blind people, we're often at the cutting edge of technology because we're always looking for that next big thing, that next piece of technology that can make our lives easier. We're all about trying to stay in the workplace, right? Or get into the workplace. And to do that, you have to be at the forefront of tech. Now, the camera on our smartphones for blind people was a way to extract information from letters, from post, from information. In the early days, you were OCR and you were using essentially scanning technology to scan a letter and read it. But of course, with AI, you can go much further than that. So if I get a letter from the doctor telling me I need to go in for an appointment, I can query the letter now using AI. I can scan the image or scan the document, and I can peek out particular information that I want. When is it happening? What's the phone number? How do I call the doctor to change the appointment? These are the kind of ways you can use the camera, which is really cool. But of course, on board an iPhone as well, or an Android phone now, you have your assistants. And for people like myself, talking to a device is much easier than trying to navigate through using a screen reader, which is essentially a way to navigate through a smartphone by audio only. And trust me, when you do it long enough, you get used to it, but you still hate every second of it because it's swipe, 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 and you're hearing everything. I just want to do something. I want to buy that yellow kettle on Amazon, and I want it to be around $50. So instead of having to go through the whole process of a million search results, if I can just say, find me a yellow kettle that costs around $50 on Amazon, and it just surfaces up a list, I can use that. And there was one company on display at CSUN that showcased this, a company called InnoSearch. That's INNO search. And what they do is they've essentially taken all the search results from Amazon and made it into a much more searchable, much more easy to navigate system for blind users. You can even invoke AI to query the images on the product. So for example, if I was buying, say, a Bluetooth speaker, and I wanted to know if it had a 3.5mm headphone jack on it, I can query the images and say, does this speaker have that? It can tell me if it does or doesn't. So cool and vital for a blind customer.
One of the things I've been curious about when you speak about new technology is so much of these enhancements and improvements are packed into the latest technology, which tends to be somewhat expensive at times for the average person. When we look at the digital divide that exists right now in terms of getting assistive technology out to people, do you see it getting any better?
It's definitely improving. There is still a huge digital divide that we need to discuss and talk about. I think at the base level, what is good is that assistive technology is inside every product we own. If you walk into a Best Buy today, almost everything in that store will be accessible to some degree or another. The only area which is lacking at the moment is appliances. So if you buy a dishwasher or you buy a washing machine or a dryer, you're not getting accessibility quite as good in there. But if you go to the computer section, every Mac, every Windows computer, every Chromebook has accessibility built into the core for low vision, for blind, and for multiple disabilities. And that's really, really important because that democratizes accessibility to some degree. We can choose what we want, and we know that we can have the same product as everyone else. When I got my iPhone, the very first iPhone came out, I'll be honest, I was terrified because this was essentially a sheet of glass with a button on it. And I'm thinking, how are we as blind people going to use this? And it wasn't until the fourth generation came along, they launched this thing called VoiceOver. And suddenly blind people were opened up to this world. And then from there on, Google launched TalkBack, and they have their own version of this. So I can buy any Android phone, I can buy any iPhone, and it's fully accessible. And of course, now with the ranges out there, you don't have to buy the latest and greatest. If you're struggling or you're on a budget, you can get access to maybe an earlier iPhone SE, or you could maybe buy a younger phone or an older phone, I should say, an iPhone 14 or 12. Essentially, you can get yourself on the ladder. You can go refurbished and you can get access to the same technology as everyone else. And that is what really is going to make the difference here.
When I think about what's happening today in 2025, and I look at some of the big tech companies and I see a bit of backlash against DEI, for example. I saw a really great interview that you did with someone who works in the US government where you were chatting about the fact that the A was missing in DEI and it's important to think about accessibility. Can you share a little bit more about that topic and how we can keep that front and center?
Yeah, I mean, I think that DEI is detached from the A being for accessibility, mainly because of the fact that some see accessibility as a tool, whereas DEI affects the people. But in fact, the tool is necessary because the people need it, right? So it's all combined. Essentially, what Brian DeConnick was talking about in his amazing piece that he wrote on his blog, The Politics of Accessibility, which is well worth reading. It was such an interesting article. And he was quite nervous to come on, I'll be honest, Amber. He wasn't overly keen on the idea because, it's a really delicate topic and no one really wants that spotlight on them in this space. But it was an important discussion to have, and he kind of kept away from the politics and talked more about how the politics of accessibility began, where it all began, how politics were involved, how governments were involved, and how moving away from that will have a detrimental impact on services. Because if companies aren't needing to impose or bring in accessibility requirements in the same way with DEI, then people will fall away. Now, I understand the arguments around DEI. I can see the arguments for and against. Some people feel it's gone too far. I understand all that. But look at it this way. If I'm, as I am, a blind guy, if I don't have an option to get into a workplace, if an employer just sees me as a blind guy and says, look, as a result of seeing you as a blind guy, that's it, I can't employ you. And trust me, in the UK alone, 92% of employers told a study in the UK alone, they would not employ a blind or disabled person. 92% of employers surveyed in this study, which was done 5 years ago, and according to recent stats, nothing much has changed. What chance have I got? We need DEI programs to help us get into employment so we can show what we can do. Once you're in the door, it's about showing your capability, and then you can succeed from there.
Does it make you nervous at all in terms of the narrative out there right now, especially on the political front, in terms of people just having much more narrow views of, who we should hire, what technology we should build? Are we at a tipping point?
I suppose I feel I've seen this movie before, and what I mean by that is that, over my career and certainly over my years, I've seen huge negative attitudes towards disability, especially. And for me, what we're seeing is, and I suppose people would say this about race as well. You're essentially seeing other people being allowed to have these viewpoints in public, whereas before they were perhaps private. Now, it's very different between racism and ableism. They're very different things. I had a black friend of mine who said that racism is born out of hate and ableism is born out of pity. And I think that's a good way to look at it. It's a good starting point from where things come from. It allows you to see where the opinions and the attitudes come from. Oh, there's that poor blind guy. He can't do very much for himself. I go to an airport, for example. I'm going to a huge conference. I'm going to be hosting this amazing podcast. I'm doing this great stuff. And yet I'm still yelled at by assistants. Are you okay there? Or alternatively, someone else talked to on my behalf. Is he okay? Can he walk? It's a classic. I didn't know that my eyes were connected to my legs, but apparently they are. So, you have these issues that you have to deal with all the time. And this is a daily occurrence. The problem is when people start to turn nasty about it, when the narrative becomes nasty. That's something that worries me, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned both the words hate and pity, but I would add a third word in there, and I would say it's ignorance. Certainly,
Mm.
as someone like myself who's covered the tech industry for a couple of decades, I've always been acutely aware, as much as I possibly can be. I try to include technology that maybe is accessible not to everybody, but a certain segment of the population. And I can't tell you the number of times that I've gotten pushback where people say, like, "How could you possibly be so lazy that you can't just get up and turn on your thermostat?" And I have to remind people, like, not everybody can get up and turn on their thermostat and actually see their thermostat. But there is an ignorance there as well in terms of, people seeing technology through the lens of it allowing for accessibility to a wide swath of the population.
Yeah, and look, don't beat yourself up over it. I mean, I hate this narrative sometimes that comes out by disability advocates that suggests that everyone should know absolutely everything about everything all the time. That's not possible. You cannot know. I was low vision. I was blind. I had a girlfriend once who was in a wheelchair. I had no idea what that life was like. I couldn't tell you what her experience was like versus mine. It's a different thing. Now, should I learn? Should I educate myself? Yeah, sure. But you know what? I've got a lot of learning and education to do. I've got a life to lead. I've got things going on. We're all the same. We have to meet people where they are. I think good conversation and intrigue is a good way to start. I'm all for like this, having a conversation. We learn so much from each other. This is far more valuable than me sitting here saying, Amber, you need to do more on this or more on that. No, what you need to do is do exactly what you're doing, which is encourage conversation. And that's brilliant. We need to have more of that.
I think you're right. It's a great starting point. When we look ahead and you think of some of the big tech companies out there, I'm not asking you to pick favorites, but are there tech companies, generally speaking, that are doing a better job when it comes to accessibility and assistive tech?
Well, this is where CSUN's quite interesting because you get the chance to meet not just the assistive tech companies, but all the big mainstream players were there as well. So Amazon were there, LG were there, showcasing a number of products, which was quite interesting. Sony was the one that really stood out, actually, because they have an amazing new device out, which is a camera, which has been around for a long time, an A7C II. They've had the Sony DSLR range, which now has a screen reader built in. So that essentially means that someone who's low vision can actually use one of these cameras. I could never navigate the menu system on those. I love those cameras, but I can't use them. So, the idea that now comes with a screen reader is incredible. And the guy running this, El Dean, who's running this over at Sony, he is legally blind himself. And that is ultimately what we're looking for. We want the buy-in from the companies, but we kind of need people in there to do the bidding for us to some degree. And it's great when you can get people who are disabled into these companies. So I think Sony's doing a great job. I think Google, I think Amazon especially, of course, they've done a lot of work in this space. And I can't not say Apple because, if I was to pick a favorite, it would probably be Apple. And I'll tell you why. I know people think I'm a fanboy, and I am. But here's the thing. Every single product they bring out, I know will be accessible. Even the damn Vision Pro, which shouldn't even work for me, but it can. It's got a built-in screen reader. I can use it. I can navigate it entirely. Why I'd want to, I don't know. But the fact is the option is there. And that's what it's all about. Anyone at any time can join the Disability Club, whether they like it or not. We need to make sure the world is accessible for everybody, including those who are not disabled.
It was hard for me to really pick just one video on your YouTube channel because there are so many. But one that kind of made me chuckle a little bit was talking about accessible TVs, because I have to say, as someone who's been in the tech industry for 2 decades, navigating any type of TV is still difficult. So I have to ask the question, is there any one TV out there that's better than any other in terms of being accessible for a wider range of people?
It's a difficult one because there's a lot of options out there and some are better than others. I wouldn't say there's one that pips the post at all. I'd say that Fire TVs maybe are the closest from Amazon. But, Sony and Samsung have done great work in this space. I'm watching Samsung eagerly. The problem isn't really the television itself. I mean, I just think that the layout of these things, and you'll know this yourself, I don't think the layout's very good at all. I often say, I don't know how anyone can enjoy using these things. They're slow, they're laggy.
Sure.
And when you add a screen reader into that, you can see really how laggy it is. Because, when you press that button to arrow down, I'm guessing something visually is happening on screen. Maybe the whole thing's moving up a bit or whatever. And it's taken time for the screen reader to respond because it has to wait for everything to get into position so it can focus on it. And that's a real problem. So there's that. But then also there's the third-party application. So you go off and download Netflix or Disney or Paramount Plus or whatever it is. You go off and get these apps and you download them onto your TV. There's no guarantee that they will be accessible with the screen reader built into the television. So you end up in this situation where you don't get access to the things on the TV you want to access. And then, of course, there's a whole discussion around described video and whether that's available in the platform. And it does turn a lot of blind people off television because they say, oh, look, this is just it's a fight I just cannot be bothered having.
When we look into the future, and I don't want to ask you to predict 5 or 10 years out, but is there something that you're especially excited about?
I think the rise in AI is good. I think we see a lot of bad and a lot of negative in AI. I think for the blind community, for the disability community more widely, I think in terms of automation, in terms of being able to, and assistance in particular on our smartphones getting smarter, I think these are the things we need to watch because these are where essentially the accessibility becomes easier. Now, it will get to a point, I believe, where we will no longer have traditional operating systems like we've had before with apps and all the rest. It'll probably be agentic, right? So we'll be using AIs to perform tasks. I want an Uber, it knows where I am, it asks me where I'm going, and it just works. And that's it. And I think what will happen is, again, like the technology, the hardware has been democratized to some degree. The software will follow with AI. So that's the bit I'm looking forward to. Cannot wait for driverless cars. I keep thinking I want my driverless car to take me to KFC. But then I think to myself, well, can't I just get the car to go to KFC itself and bring me back the chicken food? That would be nice. But no, I'm intrigued in that and how AI can influence mobility through guidance, through WeWalk, and those kind of smart devices that are helping us get around more easily. It's a really exciting time with AI.
Yeah, it absolutely is. So for people who want to watch some of your content, some of the TV content, where is the best place for them to go?
So the website's doubletaponair.com. Yeah, we still say on air. It's a bit old-fashioned these days, but yeah, we're doing that. And also you can get us Double Tap Video is what to search for. We have to say that because otherwise we end up in amongst some really interesting categories because of the name Double Tap. So yeah, but Double Tap Video is where you'll find us on YouTube, and we're across social media. Mastodon's where I tend to live, but also on X as well.
Well, listen, thank you so much for joining me. I could talk to you forever. I love all of your content, especially the daily shows that you're putting out there, the coverage from CSUN as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, Amber. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve and Amber. Well, that's it for this week's show. Thanks for all your comments on social media this past week. Whether you're listening in your car, on a walk, or just while you're working at home, we really appreciate your support, and we're excited to build this community.
Speaking of community, we chatted last week about the new book, Careless People, from a Facebook whistleblower. Here's more on this topic from my free newsletter this past week. Over the years, I've watched Facebook stumble time and time again, even experiencing the company's careless behavior firsthand a few years back. We don't want her to moderate. Those were the words I heard from Sheryl Sandberg's large team of assistants and PR people waiting in the wings at an event I was hosting in Europe. I had meticulously prepared to interview Sandberg and a business icon on center stage. But the morning before the session, the Facebook executives group pulled the plug, even though the questions and conversation details had been reviewed and approved. Now, I'm not one to wallow in disappointment, but it was uncomfortable behavior, especially as they whispered for the better part of an hour about the dangers of having a tech columnist moderate the fireside chat within earshot of me. Like all good professionals, I moved on from that moment, privately questioning the authenticity of Sandberg's lean-in mantra advocating for women at work. I did not think much about this event blip until last week when I picked up a copy of Careless People and read it end to end in a short 48-hour span. In this memoir, former Facebook executive Sarah Wynne Williams unpacks many years of traveling and working with Sandberg, Mark Zuckerberg, and other senior team members. The book reveals many moments of disappointing and irresponsible decisions at the social media company, including knowingly sharing data that would help advertisers target young girls who were feeling badly about their bodies. Meta is trying to squash the book's success, taking legal action against the author's promotional efforts. As tech blog Vox wrote, and I quote, "The Meta CEO's commitment to free expression doesn't apply to embarrassing memoirs." And just this week, the book has become wildly popular. As the New York Times reported just a few days ago, Careless People has debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's also spent much of the week in the #3 position on Amazon. That's despite the fact that Sarah Wynne Williams, who is that former policy director at Facebook, has been barred from promoting it. Now, here in Canada and many other parts of the world, Facebook and its sister sites have done insurmountable damage. Yes, these platforms do allow people to come together in important ways, but more and more, they're also tearing people apart. In 2025, we're going to see Meta amplify even more lies, misinformation, and disinformation, along with blocking news in countries that want the company to pay its fair share of damage to the media ecosystem. If you want more tech insights like this, I invite you to subscribe to my free weekly newsletter. And thank you so much for listening to The Amber Max Show. And please head on over to theambermaxshow.com. There's a contact button on the site if you have any feedback about the show. Have a wonderful week. Thanks for listening and sharing, and we'll see you soon.
You're listening to The Amber Max Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.